Good evening and a warm welcome to all of you from us at IME. The Indian Music Experience is India's first interactive music museum. The IME is a non-profit initiative supported by the Brigade Group. The vision of the IME is to introduce the youth to the diversity of Indian music. Collab Conversation is a new series of conversations that explores the exciting world of musical collaborations in the contemporary Indian music scene, curated and moderated by well-known music journalist Amit Gurbaxani. Our first collab conversation features Mumbai-based singer-songwriter Mali, whose collaboration with Indo-Canadian producer Arnob Bal resulted in the album Caution to the Wind. Amit Gurbaxani is a music journalist who specializes in writing about business trends in the Indian music industry and the workings of its independent scene. Over the last 2 decades, his work has been published in a variety of Indian and international publications such as Billboard, First Post, India Today, Music Ally, Scroll, and The Guardian. Hailing from Chennai and based in Mumbai, Mali or Malvika Manoj has worked with the biggest artists in the Indian music business, such as A.R. Rahman and Anirudh Ravichander. She has toured the world and performed at Wembley in London and La Zenith in Paris. As a solo artist, she's been featured on BBC World News, in the BBC documentary Rhythms of India, in Rolling Stone, The Hindu, Verve, amongst other publications. In 2021, Forbes listed her as one of India's 30 under 30. Arnob Bal is a producer, composer based in Mumbai and Toronto. He has produced albums for a variety of acts both in India and Canada. He also releases solo music under the name Family. We'd also like to convey our best belated wishes to Arnob, whose birthday it was yesterday. We request our audiences joining us to send us your questions on our chat. With that, I hand over to Amit, who will begin Collab Conversations.
Thank you so much, Rishi, and firstly, thank you to the IME for asking me to put this together. Collaboration is at the heart of a lot of music, especially independent music and Indian independent music, where it's really like a family, no pun intended, for in this particular case. But so when the Indian Music Experience asked me to, for who we could feature first, literally the first name that came to mind was Mali, and because I had just heard her album Caution to the Wind, and I really think it's one of the best albums to come out of the scene this year.
Wow.
And it's basically, I think maybe I'm a little partial because it's also sort of is influenced by a lot of the kind of music that I love, which is 1980s and 1970s, like pop and rock and synthwave and folk and all those kinds of things. And I've chatted with her extensively about the making of the album, and she told me how this album is a true collaboration in the sense that she and Arnob sat together and worked on it for months and months, and it was just like years, actually, sorry, years. And and I think that the fact that the role of the producer is something that's so rarely ever discussed when it comes to Indian independent music. It's often in the background, it's often in the liner notes and the credits, and we don't really see them in the spotlight. So I thought it was like a perfect opportunity to discuss that. So firstly, thank you guys so much for being here, and of course Arnob for being here. Who we heard you are based in Mumbai and Toronto, but you're actually right now in Arizona, where it's 6 a.m. in the morning.
It is.
Plus, you had birthday celebrations last night, so like extra special thanks to you for like being awake and being here.
My pleasure.
And I thought that we could start the conversation off by asking you a very sort of kind of basic question, because I feel there's a lot of misconceptions around what a producer does. And the first thing I really wanted to ask you is like, most Indian independent albums are self-produced, the majority of them. Very few artists, and I think they, especially only one after they come to a certain stage, and most of the time in their careers, they actually enlist the services of a producer. So I wanted to ask you to set the record straight and tell everybody firstly, what exactly a producer does, what artists should expect when they work with producers, and obviously it's quite different from when most people will get their album, they work with the sound engineer and, they finish the album and send it off to be mixed and mastered. But like, there's no involvement of an outside producer quite often. But the producer can really be the difference between a record that sounds good and one that sounds great. So, yeah, so you could just like, shed some light on that.
So can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly.
So I would say first off, the phenomenon of artists self-producing in this day and age, in particular, when the means of production are so readily available to us all. In the beginning, lots of artists all around the world, independent artists, are going to be self-producing, and a lot of that comes down to the confusion. I mean, the word producer encompasses like a few different types of things within the context of music. You can have like a hip hop producer, or a beat maker, I should say, is more correct. That's somebody that maybe just creates an instrumental, some type of backing track, and then a singer, a songwriter may compose vocals to that track, and then the two sort of come together. That sometimes is called, like the person who made that instrumental will sometimes be credited as a producer. Then other times you have rock bands, and they've composed most of the music themselves, and then you have somebody who's like a producer, but that person fills more the role of like a director to a film. So if like you have a screenplay that's written by somebody, and then a director comes in and directs the process, even though they've not written the narrative. So that's a very different type of task, a very different type of job, requires a different type of skill sets. And then, there's other types of forms. Like, for example, Mally and I, she's a singer-songwriter. She's got songs, lyrics, melodies, chords. In most cases, she came to me with some demos that she had done on Logic with a few basic synthesizers and stuff. But that's a third situation again. You could think of it as intermediate between the first two, where she's come with the lyrics and melody and chords, and together we have constructed the arrangement. It wasn't just me that made the arrangement, but it also wasn't her. Like, we really had to work together, and I had to imbibe her vision because ultimately they're her songs. So that's another incarnation of what it means to be a producer. So that sounds like a long-winded answer, but that's the reason probably why many people are self-producing, because there's this gray area. Like, I also have to take on the role of sound engineer sometimes as well, sometimes completely, depending on the project. So where's the line? Like, if you hire a sound engineer to record your album, sometimes that sound engineer will be doing a little bit of what is considered production. Sometimes the artist is doing a little bit of what is considered production if they're making the arrangements themselves, if they're programming, or figuring it out. So it's the definition itself of a producer is a little bit gray. I hope that answers the question. Was there another part to the question about what a producer does for an artist, or what an artist can expect?
That was like sort of, and that's something we can sort of explore, I suppose, as we go along this conversation. Mally, I wanted to ask the artist's perspective. Why don't we see more independent musicians using producers? I mean, is it costing? Like, is it because, like, mentioned, a lot of people don't use producers until they've reached a certain stage in their career. So is it cost an aspect, or is it a psychological thing that, okay, this is my creative vision, I don't want somebody else coming in and like telling me what it should sound like, because this is very much a co-produced record, right? You'll both have produced it together.
Well, I think one definitely is cost, because most of us indie musicians were on a budget. Oftentimes, the thing we spend the most on is really making our music or making any kind of content. We don't really expect to make it back from streaming or anything for that matter. So I often describe it as an expensive visiting card. And depending on, like, I mean, you could have a weightage, like a different weightage for different things. Like, some artists will maybe really bootstrap the production of the record, but then use most of the funds at their disposal to maybe make more video content, or like spend more on, say, making, getting remixes made, maybe, or getting a bunch of other stuff done on the side. Or if it's a heavy on instrumentation kind of album, then they'd spend on that. In this case, like this album, the songs were ready, and I have my band. Fortunately, shout out to my band. And we, like, some of the songs we already played on stage, and we kind of knew roughly what the songs would be like when they take shape. But it needed that extra sort of set of ears to kind of judge the songs from an outside perspective and say, here's how I think you could enhance the sound of these songs in a way that it could sound like a final finished product that doesn't sound like a band has played it out. Which was, for me, I think that was my thinking behind, like, getting a producer, and specifically getting Arnob on this project, was I just wanted someone with a completely different bent of mind musically to come on and just add fresh perspective to the music, which is what happened.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because you both come from very different spaces, right? I mean, like Arnob, I believe you are more from the electronic music space. I mean, you have that your project family, and you're sort of like into hip hop and stuff. And Mali is, this pure pop rock space and folk and all this kind of stuff. And I believe that you all found common ground in your love for synthesizer music, And yeah, so could you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, was that something that you all just got to know as you all had conversations with each other?
Yeah, I think for me, like, I'm a closet 80s kid because my parents raised me on a lot of 80s music. That was their heyday, and I think they were still hungover from the 80s a little bit while I was growing up. And then my parents would also listen to a lot of techno and early electronic in the 90s, which was still a sort of hungover, like a hangover from new wave and heavy synth music from the 80s. So those were like my upbringing. That was my upbringing, and I always had this guilty pleasure for like super poppy synth music. And these songs just lend themselves really well to that kind of arrangement. And that's when Arnob and I got together, we found that like the middle ground for us was really, his tying together his understanding of like synthesis and my love for like nice pop synth music. And yeah, Arnob, what do you think?
Yeah, that sounds about accurate. It took a while for us to, it took a while for me to realize that I was working on a record that was going to sound as eclectic as this. Some of the songs when we started, it took a long time before I don't know about Mali, but it took a long time before I even realized that we were going to go a certain direction with it. Like Cabaret, it just got more and more 80s as we continued with the process. And with that song,
make it more 80s, or not make it more 80s.
Yeah.
It was
the song we had already tracked the drums and stuff, and so we were pretty far into the process, and the song kept changing. I didn't come up on 80s music so much. I was really influenced by 90s trends. That's when I was a teenager. But
it's
then, like,
because Mali is like a 90s kid and you're an 80s kid, so it's like
it's sort of how it would work, because your formative like sort of music consumption years are your teens and your early 20s.
Yeah.
So, it would make sense, and every decade has that revolt from the previous decade. So when I was a teenager in the 90s, it was really cool to just make fun of 80s music, because in the 90s it was all about the 70s. So I only opened up to 80s music like later on in my life, like in my early 20s, when that sort of music started coming back. So my formative stuff was in the 90s music. So this project was the first time I got to try out like 80s sounds, like full wholeheartedly, But it took us a while to figure that out. And in some cases, it just emerged that way. Like I don't know if and when early on, if we just explicitly said that we want to make a bunch of 80s sounding tracks. That's not necessarily what happened.
Well, I think really what it was is there were 8 different songs. Like each of the songs on the album have like a separate set of instrumentation influences. And we almost had at one point of time like 3 distinct sounds within the album. You had something that was more 70s, like heavy band-ish instrumentation with like strings and like the Glock and all of the music box and all of those elements coming in, which had a far more acoustic band old world sound. And then we had a more like synth inspired type of sound, which we could hear more on songs like Sitting on the Fence, Limbo, and Live Again.
Yeah.
And then you had, like, I would say, like, more sugary pop, like happy kind of songs, which are like mundane, and Horoscope, I think, would really fit that description.
It's
So
funny you should say that because
Yeah.
lyrically they're not sugary pop at all, right?
they're not, but like compared to the rest of the songs, they definitely do have a little more of a youthful, younger, more innocent, I don't know, for lack of a better word, sound. And so all of a sudden our challenge was like, okay, we have these three distinct kind of like sounds weaving in and out of each other on the album. How do we make them more cohesive for the sound of the album? So at some points we actually, we made conscious choices to like reintroduce maybe like a synth sound, or reintroduce like some motif somewhere else in the album, just to sort of bind them together as one composite body of work. So that also we did. Like as much as it naturally shaped up that way, there were points of time where we actually like, to further tie things in, we kind of like introduce stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as we go along, I think that you will also play us some snippets and tell us
Yeah.
exactly what you guys did, right? So yeah. Arnob, I want to ask you.
Say this.
Yeah, sorry.
I will say this in terms of finding common ground. It wasn't like, I mean, we spent a lot of time doing synths and synthesis, but like we had a lot of other common ground. Like we spent a lot of time just listening to references. And so we connected over just sharing references and just we spent a lot of time just listening to music, trying to figure out, what
we spent many months just like sharing our favorite albums, like just sitting and having listening sessions, drinking coffee, talking about like memories attached to certain music, really getting on the same page. I think that was probably as important as demoing the album, was really just getting to understand each other from the point of view of music.
That was
So
part
is that unusual though? Is that like is something that you would typically do? Because Arnob, you work with short round singer-songwriter. You work with like Cognac Net, who sound like as pop rock, but also can go into hard rock territory. Like how is that typically what you do?
I normally try to get to know the artist I'm working with, and I will provide references to the artist to show, like, okay, what if we tried something like this? Or I think it would be really, like, if an artist is halfway written a song and the song isn't finished, you can say, like, I think you'd really dig this, and that might inspire you to finish the song. So it's hard for me to work with somebody, especially on an album, without having an interpersonal relationship with them, getting to know them, getting to know where they're coming from. Whether it's Mali or Short Round, their vision that I have to ultimately honor. So you need to take that time to get to know the person and get to know what they're trying to say. And then just beyond that, you are working with them. So you want to have it's a creative relationship. You're not just working together at Starbucks. Like
it's so much of a personal relationship. Like I think through making this album, Arnob and I have become like inseparable friends.
Yeah,
because we almost understand not just our working relationship with each other, but like just how we are, what our frame of mind is. Like it's impossible for us to sit down and get into like working if something is on one of our minds. So we'll spend like a good half an hour, 1 hour maybe before a session. If there's something that's troubling either of us, we'll talk about it, get it out there. And then we're able to kind of set it aside, literally throw caution to the wind and continue work on the album. So that was definitely a trend in our working styles. Like we worked through like protests and floods and cyclones and all kinds of like major external events. We would just be like, okay, we're here now. Let's just make a coffee and talk about this and work on the album. That's how it happened.
And was this was this the first time you were sort of working with a producer so extensively? I mean,
yes, definitely. Like first time I really got to be on the shop floor of the production of this album, because before this, I'd worked with producers, but there was a lot of work that was maybe done at home and then shown to me later, and then we would debate things and I would give my feedback. But in this, it was very much me being in the room with Arnob, like actually physically helping, maybe search through tones, Jimmy, knobs around and all of that. And I think that was like the most immersive process in terms of like working with the producer for me. Like I really felt very much like I had no regrets in terms of, oh no, this idea is not fully mine, or I didn't fully agree with this. For this project, I was like, no, I was invested in every single idea on this album, and so it really felt good at the end of the day.
Yeah. And Arnab, I don't know if he's frozen a bit. Oh yeah, no, there you are. Okay, so yeah.
I was just moving around because I thought the connection was getting weird. Yeah. Is the connection
okay,
bad
yeah.
if I move over here again?
You're fine.
Am I
as in,
getting worse? Yeah. Okay.
I think the
I'm just
connection was
trying not to
fine where
wait.
you
the connection was all right where you were.
Yeah.
No, you guys started chopping up, so I was just wondering what was going on. I'm sorry.
All right. Yeah. One can never tell. But yeah,
For those of you who just joined, Arnob is all the way in Arizona.
Arizona. Yeah. So, yeah.
Wanna take a look?
Yeah.
Heavy night last night.
Cactuses.
Oh wow.
Wow. Desert life, probably.
Yeah.
Adobe homes.
Yeah. You can shoot some album covers there. While you're there. Yeah. So Arnab, you can walk and talk if you like, but I was going to ask you. You mentioned sort of you wanting to sort of have that relationship with the artists that you work with, but is that typically how producers work? I mean, do you have this kind of elongated kind of just getting to know each other stage before you actually sit down and start working on the music?
So it's not uncommon, but certainly a lot of producers will be more transactional, and it also, again, it depends on the breakdown of those descriptions I mentioned earlier. Like if you're just making lots of beats and selling them, maybe you're not doing that. Maybe you are doing that. Maybe you're making lots of beats, selling them, and then as part of that service of making a beat, you're recording the artist and you have some investment in making sure that vocal sounds good. But then if you're working on a long project with somebody, if you're working on a lot of songs with somebody, whether in an album or just a bunch of recurring singles.
Knobs.
Okay. Now
Relationships, you can be more transactional with it. My person, yeah.
Oh no, you just froze for a second there.
You can be more transactional. You can be more transactional with it, and there are people that do that. My personal hero, Mr. Rick Rubin, I mean, the whole thing that inspired me to become a producer, the whole thing that made me aware of what a record producer is, it's Rick Rubin and his work with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. There's a documentary called Funky Monks where it shows the process of making that record. And it was the first time I realized that that's what a record producer does. And, Rick Rubin has a reputation of being this very zen kind of guy. He's the guy that you're supposed to come to with your questions. And, that's in the context of, music production, I aspire to be that person for the project, right?
Yeah.
And so, that's just how I work. There are times when it's not like Mally and I have developed a very good friendship. And I think to the point where I would say Mally and I have a very good teamwork. That's different than, say, a different artist that I might work with.
It's actually pretty rare. Yeah. It's quite rare to have what Arnob and I have, like that rapport is I've not seen it in a lot of producer artist relationships. Usually it's one person cribbing about the other all the time. And a lot of that is also, one is like a role conflict. One is, one person's doing more work than the other, or one person's not delivering, or something like that. Which I think we never really touched wood had that for us, And I think what's important is we were both good and like very open about our communication at any point. Like if there was something that was troubling us, we talk about it rather than like keep it in or like take it out in any other way. So I think that really helped. Like
And we're
any
open
relationship, I
to
suppose.
each other's suggestions generally.
Yeah. I
Arnob
wanted
is my work husband.
to work husband. Like I wanted to ask you, like, yeah, did you guys have any disagreements? I mean, did you have any sort of like any points of time where you felt like, oh, why am I doing this? Like,
I think
love that.
the closest thing we had to a disagreement is, and for those of you who are listening who may not have heard the album, I'm gonna just play like a little clip of the first song of the album. Shushi, you can pull that up right about now, whenever you're ready. Just give me a go if you can see it. All right, so this is the album. You can go listen to it on YouTube and anywhere else on the internet. But song number one is a song called Live Again. And if you observe the opening strains,
can you hear them?
can you hear?
You're having visions in the sun.
Has it gone on?
But if you close your eyes, then I'll come back.
Okay, so that entire first part of that song sounded very different for like a long time. Like we actually had a very simple drums. Did we have any drums at that point? It was just guitar, vocals.
Guitar and vocals and pad, different pads.
That's it. Like that was it. Like very stripped down, very band-like, acoustic sounding thing. And it actually sounded really like happy and pleasant for me. And for me, the song is a very dark song. It comes from a dark place. It's about like picking yourself up after like a devastating kind of blow to your confidence. And I really was hearing that first part being like a dark kind of brooding start to the album and the song. And I sat down with Aaron, I'm like, so the first part of Live Again is just not cutting it. We need to do something different. And he was just like, what are you talking about? It sounds great.
We were
And I'm
almost done. I was convinced.
yeah, we were like maybe a few months away from like turning these songs in for mix. And Arnob was like, why are you trying to reinvent the wheel now? And I'm just like, you'll trust me on this. We should rework the first part of the song. It's gonna sound better. But like right now it sounds too happy. Like it sounds like a classic 90s kind of happy band jam, at least at the start of it. And so we completely stripped out the first part, saved the vocals, and then we rearranged it over a few sessions. We added the synths, we added these like dark delayed hat and snare. And it just shaped up that way. We weren't trying for it to sound like anything else. Like I think another thing that happens is you have references for an album. You say, okay, fine, I want the groove of this song to resemble this, and I want the keys to resemble this. It's good to have that framework, but very often you end up taking a complete U-turn from that, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to reject the reference and do my own thing. And that's what ended up happening with this album. Like it's difficult when we actually made a playlist of our references, and no song sounds like anything on the reference. It's just its own thing.
Yeah, what were some of the references, Zeru? Tell us.
Oh wow. Okay, so which song do you want to know for? I'll tell you.
I mean, play whichever you want. You want to play us something and then show us what it was supposed to sound like, or what the references were.
So I remember for Absolute, one of the references for the drums was "I Want Love" by Elton John.
Ah, yeah, okay. Yeah,
And
that song has been on my mind for a long time. Maybe
yeah,
until
like the
last week.
group. Okay, I'm sorry, there's an ad. Sorry about that. That was an ad break brought to you by, I forgot who that even was. But so, for example,
So liberated, I can't look, shot full of holes. Don't feel nothing, I just feel cold.
right? So you can tell like maybe even the tempo, the whole like piano driven ballad type
Yeah.
sound, all of that was, there are many references. That was just one of them that demonstrates what we were thinking of. So like I think maybe this is the closest reference to a song that we used, that I turned out. But like that, we had different things. So, for example, for Age of Limbo, weirdly, I think Streets of Philadelphia by Bruce Springsteen was also a reference because it's got this like loopy drum track,
Yeah.
and it's got like, very vocal driven, very melody driven. But the drum track is kind of holding it down, which was also a super 90s type feature.
Yeah.
So it was just like something like this, but not exactly that. And we had to just strip it down and figure out our own way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any particular track where maybe you guys are you gonna play us something now?
Oh no, I just kept it open for when we are playing.
Yeah, I was saying that anything where you're sort of like I said, you'll sort of had you're one on the same page about something, but one of you either relented or sort of met each other midway. You know, is something like that happen?
I think we collectively relented a couple of times.
Yeah.
Like for Absolute, the song was going to be just piano and vocals. Like it was going to be an acoustic song. In fact, even the last song, Really Not Really, that was just going to be guitars and vocals. And at the start, I was like, Arnob, these two songs you don't have to worry about. We just need to record properly and it'll be done. That's it. Like maybe harmonies, that's about it. We didn't envision strings, we didn't envision drums, bass, none of it. Absolute was like one day we sat down and we were like, what if we added strings? Like I'm just hearing a string part, and then strings became, let's add drums, and then drums were
Yeah.
like, how can you have drums without bass? And then there was bass, and then there was a key change, and then there was like a full vocal choir happening. So that escalated pretty quickly, and so we had to kind of use restraint even through the escalation of the production ideas. But that was just us, just like systematically relenting at various stages in a good way. Like it turned out all right.
There were other parts where we had disagreements and one of us had to compromise or the other. There was like even amount of both, I'd say. But like we had a good amount of openness and receptiveness to each other's comments and criticisms, so we got through it. It doesn't always work like that. So that's more a testament to Mally and I's interpersonal relationship.
Like
Yeah,
I
but
would say one important thing is we were always open to try the other person's ideas. Like say Arnob was like, hey, what if we just add this thing? I mean, just the simple decision to say, okay, let's devote the next hour to just adding this thing and seeing if it works, we'll see.
Yeah.
And just that openness to just like try an idea that we had and see if it works or not was also like a big part of it. Maybe that's why it took us 2 years to make this album, but we at least
There
tried
was
everything.
a pandemic as well, I believe.
There was a pandemic. This is true.
Yeah, yeah, and you were both based in Bombay at the time, right? So none of this was done remotely.
Mhm.
None of this was done remotely.
I would
But,
say mixing was the stage that was done the most remotely. All of our mixing and mastering happened.
We had almost everything recorded before the pandemic started.
Okay. Yeah. But Arnab, just like building on what you said, like it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't always work that way. But whether it's from this album, any other particular album, like what are some of the pain points that you find that you're working on when you're
You mean
producing?
specifically with this album?
Yeah, specifically with this album or any other album. You don't have to name names, but if you can just give us an example.
Oh, like this types of pain points?
Yeah.
So like this is, you have to get straight in your own mind as a producer, right? Like, what am I doing? What am I working on? Like Mally and I have worked on this together, and it is like a collaboration, and it is something we very much worked on together. But ultimately, these are her songs, and this is her vision. So, you know, if I don't understand that properly, then I may find myself pushing stuff on the arrangement that doesn't need to be there. So I have to remove my ego out of it, or at the very least, I have to attach my ego to making sure her songs sound as good as possible. At the very least, if I can't remove my ego from it completely. So, but that would be different than if, like, let's say Mally and I came to a collaboration in a different kind of way. Like, let's say I'm like that first example. I'm making instrumentals, and I just ask Mally to compose a song to it, or we become a duo. You know, that's a different context. And so the pain points would be different. So, and this is also, you know, it's difficult. As I've done more work, I have more ability to be firm when I think that a band or an artist is doing something ridiculous, like that definitely won't work, and you gotta not do this. And so, you know, in your first few albums, you don't have unless the people you're working with just respect you a lot for some reason, you don't have the ability as much to say, look, guys, that's not a good idea. Or if you do, you have to like really phrase it properly, or you don't know what's going to happen. But I think the more records you make, and the more experience you have, and the more discerning your ear gets, you do have a bit of an ability to like say, look, that's not going to work. What you're saying doesn't make any sense. You don't say it in such a rude fashion. I just woke up, so I can't think of right now. But like,
no point being tactful at 6 a.m.
Exactly. But there are times when an artist will suggest something that's just outlandish, and that's a challenge, because if you there usually is some signal in what most people are saying. Like, usually if an artist is saying something, maybe they're just not communicating what they're hearing in their head properly. And so you have to be open before you totally write something off to be like, okay, like, what are they trying to say? And at least give it a shot. But then if things can get hectic, I will give you a specific example from this record. Mally, forgive me. So we were working on Age of Limbo, and the beginning, when it's just a cello and vocals. The original cello line we came up with was somewhat lackluster. And so I just wanted to redo it, but I was having trouble coming up with it on my own. So I said, Mally, let's get together and redo this intro cello line. In that session, in the moment, like, we were only looping this like first part of the song. We weren't even like listening to the rest of the song. And we're just looping and looping and just trying to come up with a better cello line. And after a while, we kept adding more things, and then maybe we should have all the strings come in right now, and maybe they should all be doing syncopated, and then all of a sudden we have the whole string section there in the beginning, you know, before we even get to the big, you know, breakdown of the song. And so then you had to kind of scale it back and say, listen, like, we just need a cello. Like, all of a sudden now we're going back to adding a second cello and a viola and all this weird rhythmic stuff right at the beginning of the song. It's not necessary. We just need a better solo cello line. And so it kind of had to be like, look, let's back it up. Let's back it up, and let's just make a better cello melody. So that's like a type of situation.
One interesting philosophy that Arnob kept reminding me of was, when in doubt, like, if something is not sounding right, sometimes it's one instrument or one thing that has to do the job of multiple things that we want. Like, that's another, you know, technique to simplify. Like, I think it's very easy to add multiple layers and crowd a production. And Arnob's philosophy is always like, strip it down, keep it simple. If we can have one thing, you know, really taking on the weight of all of what we want, that's gonna like do a whole lot more of it, you know, make a whole lot more of a difference to the track than just like cramming it up with, you know, multiple instruments and layers.
That's the first time I'm hearing you repeat that back to me, Mally. I feel like
I have learned a lot from you. You've been like this taboo that,
it's a nice moment.
I'm just going to quickly address everyone in the comment section.
Yeah,
We've
got a few questions.
We're going to questions, But I think we're
Yeah,
going
we've
to
got a
take it at
load
the
of
end.
questions from Tanasha, which we will
Or do you
address.
want
I
to?
have a couple more questions. We'll get to the questions. I'm just wondering, Mali, do you want to play Age of Limbo a little bit so that people
Oh, for
can
sure.
hear the cello bit?
All right. So this is Age of Limbo, and at about, I'm going to play from maybe just before the real drums and everything kicks in. Oh my god, are you serious?
Oh, wow. Maybe we can mute the there.
Okay, wait. All right. Now.
It's not just a footnote on not even about which side you choose. I might be the flavor of the season, but tomorrow they'll come for you. Something to turn the tables. Something's got to give.
So, well, yeah, that's the vibe of the song. And
Yeah, now that you mention Streets of Philadelphia, and there is some sort of like, I don't know, it obviously doesn't sound anything like it, but there's something about the vibe. There's something about like, there's a cinematicness of it. And there's also the somberness of it that sort of like, there is some kind of relationship. I don't know. But
there's,
yeah,
I mean, like, I think what it is just really this drum track that's just like,
yeah,
tying everything together and holding it down, and
yeah,
everything else is sort of dancing around it. But the drum
yeah,
track is just going steady, like, just like keeping it down.
yeah,
I
yeah,
always want to make a track like that. And in fact, how I even wrote the song was really interesting. Like I have this Cog Cross keyboard workstation, and there's like a little step sequencer like you have in keyboards. And so I decided to just spend an hour just sort of futz around with the step sequencer. And then I came up
yeah,
with this groove that I was hearing in my head, which is very similar to what we ended up having. And you could tune the knob to sort of like make the tempo faster or slower. So I tuned to what I thought was the right thing.
mm,
I landed on a chord, and then after that it just kind of found itself. But right through the whole songwriting process, this groove was just going on in the
mm,
back. So it was easy for me to think of lines, to think of how it would like evolve as a song, because the groove was just holding it down. So even for the songwriting, having that groove there was, as an anchor, really helped. And I guess that's worked its way into how the song sounds as well.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and Arnob, I wanted to ask you something slightly controversial, which is a lot. Some producers feel that they don't get enough credit for their contribution, and this is something we've sort of had in the Indian independent music scene, especially recently. Is there a fair claim that artists don't always give producers the share of spotlight that they deserve?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair claim. It's common. It's a subset of the fact that sometimes collaborations can be difficult. But the thing that I always say is that I think front-facing artists, whether they're singers or like some kind of vocalist, or even actors or models, people that are kind of, they have to be in front. It can be easy to sort of, when a lot of focus is on you, it can be really easy to assume that everybody else is just around so that you can do your thing. And I mean, that's just an attitude I've encountered, frequently in different parts of the world, but also even exists within myself, I think. I mean, I was like that when I was much younger, and so I know what that feels like. In terms of getting credit, it's a lot of different things that can mean, and there's the actual credit. Like if you're posting something on YouTube, you're posting your song on YouTube or SoundCloud or whatever, just in that that little more info tab just to write, to give that information just as a basic, is some people forget to do that. But I have also noticed in the younger generation, within certain genres, especially, more openness to credit the producer. There's been like a sort of titling convention that I've noticed emerge in the last decade, where you list the names of the artists, and like it used to be the case where you'd have like such and such an artist a song featuring such and such an artist, like featuring Jay-Z, or whatever. Nowadays, instead of like so and so featuring whatever, you will you might see so and so X so and so, and often the producer's name is included right in that. And so I think the younger generation has particularly within hip hop and electronic genres, has a more openness to giving credit. But sometimes it can feel that way. And how much it feels that way also depends on what it is you did as a producer, because again, what you're doing as a producer can range from making the whole entire instrumental to making the instrumental together with somebody to just being the director. And so, even that varies so much. I will refer the audience to a good discussion that occurred on my podcast with Mr. Rohan Rajadaksha on episode 16 of my own podcast, Mispronunciation Nation. He has a lot of interesting insight on the topic, and we discussed that topic in that podcast. So there's more maybe information or thoughts or discussion that's available in that podcast.
No, and where's your podcast available to listen to?
My podcast is available on most podcasting platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube. It's also available on my website, flossdailyproductions.com.
Maybe we can post on the comments for people to see. Mispronunciation.
Mispronunciation Nation.
Yep.
And final question before, and I also love that analogy of like the director of the screenplay, but I think that's also, there is no film without a director. So I think that, let's not underestimate the significance of that role,
I think that's a lot of times movies will say directed by, like the reason you see it is the director, right? Like the reason you go see those movies is the director.
And I'd love to know what artists feel about that analogy, because also, like you said, a lot of it is about what is their contribution, and this feeling of being shortchanged, and whether the fact that producer feeling that I completely transformed into something else from what it was, just thinking, look, I brought finished songs to you, you just made someone, or something. It's interesting, and I think that podcast conversation we could check out. A final question before we move on to audience question, and this is something for you both, and I think you've addressed some of it earlier on, also, but like, what's the essential ingredient for this whole artist-producer to work? Like, what is the key
coffee.
ingredient for it to actually be successful?
Coffee is very important. Whatever vice you share, I think you should definitely do it with your producer or artist. I'm not sure, whatever. But like, I think it really helps to sort of like, see each other in a comfort space and not like in a work environment, because you can have your guard up and you may not be as candid about what you want and what your ideas are. Someone like me, I've struggled in the past with, standing my ground, for example, when it comes to like, I want this, or I feel like this could sound better. But, in many ways with Arnob and I, like, because we were really open to each other's suggestions, I was able to, at different points, say, hey, I have a suggestion, how about this? But otherwise, in the past, I've been more inclined to like not say anything and just let it happen. So whatever it takes to establish that comfort level and open communication, that's like the most important ingredient.
Yeah, one word: openness.
Yeah.
Just be open and understand how to manage your ego. from the producer's point of view, at least, right? Like, because again, it's Mali's vision. I'm just helping manifest that, and so that's, for me, that's something I got to always keep in mind. But the key word is openness. Be open and receptive.
Yeah. Great.
Yep.
So now, on the questions that we received in the comments, and there's a comment I actually received earlier on my own Facebook feed when I shared this announcement post, and it came from somebody who works with Indian classical and folk musicians primarily, and she wanted to know, and I guess it's for you, Arnob, that are there producers that actually work with niche genres, and as somebody who works, you know, in more sort of popular genres like pop rock, hip hop, and electronic, uh, like what about niche genres like Indian folk and classical music? I mean, are there producers really working there, or uh, you know?
So I don't know personally of, like, I don't know personally somebody that specializes in that. With a genre like, so I'm not super knowledgeable about those genres of music. I am familiar with them. But if I was to record, like, the moment you talk about folk music and classical music, those two traditions anywhere in the world, you're already dealing with somebody, like, it's one thing to say niche genre, but particularly with those two genres, you're dealing with something quite specific, especially in folk music traditions and classical music traditions. Like, with classical music, a producer would presumably have to be just only the director, really, and the facilitator of the music. Like, it would make no sense for me to give direction to a classical Hindustani singer to say, "Can you please change the lyrics?" That's not how that style of music works. The music sort of comes the way it is, and so the job of the producer then becomes to capture that sound in an authentic way, to capture the intent of that sound. But then again, sometimes with classical and folk, if you're talking about fusion, then that's different again. The compositional element comes in. I don't know of any producers that are working specifically in that niche genre, although I suspect they exist. But something like folk and classical, especially Indian folk and classical, would require, it would have to be focused more around how you're going to record the music rather than the direction you're going to give the artists, because presumably they already know exactly what they're doing, and unless it's fusion, and then you have
styles and styles like classical also, I mean, there's so many rules, there's so much of like an order that it has to exist. And then, because of the listenership of more classical music, there's a very fine line with doing something different and like offending people by making something that's almost offensive and, taking away from that. So I think like knowing the rules and then knowing when to break them, I guess, also becomes very important when dealing with more pure forms like classical or jazz, for that matter, I suppose.
That's good. That's a good word. When Mali said the word pure forms, and that applies more to classical. Like you first have to understand, like, if you have to understand what the artist needs, right? And if somebody's saying classical, that word pure, I'm assuming that's what it would be.
Yeah, as opposed to fusion, as opposed to fusion, classical fusion, or folk fusion.
Is the question pertaining more to fusion or not?
I don't know. They didn't specify. They just mentioned niche genres. But that also, a follow up to that would be like, how important is knowledge of the genre? Because you work across genres, and
would be different.
Yeah, obviously for fusion, that doesn't.
Knowledge of genres is very important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Knowledge of genre is important, but then also a good producer should take some time to learn about the genre. If you get a project and you think it's interesting, then you should spend some time, like the same way that I tried to absorb a lot of the music Mali was suggesting to me. It would be a similar situation. I would want to absorb and ask questions and learn about the rules and the boundaries. What are the boundaries that can be violated and not be violated in this medium? And then, again, with classical and folk, the first thing that comes to my mind is, how are we going to record it? Like, how can we record it to make it to really convey the message? So it's more about the how in the recording process rather than let's add a synthesizer here.
Yeah. But that's something you would be open to doing, right? I mean, I'm just thinking. Like,
I would love to do something like that. Yeah. I would love to do something that's more logistically, like, like, for example, one of my favorite records. It's not Indian classical, but it's Cuban folk music with the Buena Vista Social Club. Yeah. And Ry Cooder goes over there to Cuba and meets all these amazing folk musicians that are super old, and it's just a process of how to capture this sound. Now, Ry Cooder contributes some slide guitar and stuff. I'm not Ry Cooder, so I wouldn't do that. But that type of thing. I mean, I would love to take like a folk tradition and just capture it really well, like record it really well and capture the sincerity of that. That's something I'd love to do.
Yeah. Cool. So just going to look at some of the other comments. We've got a comment from Vishwas which says, Caution to the Wind is definitely one of the best albums of the year so far. So I'm not the only one to think.
Thank you, Vishwas. Thank you.
Yeah. And then we've got the Nasha Music, who's got a bunch of questions, and we're almost out of time. So I'm just going to pick and choose some of the ones. And I think that the first one is to Mali, and I think she's asking, when you played your songs live with your band before producing the album, how did you play them? Was it different from how you ended up producing the tracks? What was that journey like?
So how we played it live, I mean, we didn't play all of the songs live before making the album. Some of them, like Live Again, Cabaret, we played live. Absolute, we played live, So we had done a few songs live and then we hadn't done anything live. So the first time we actually played them was after that they were recorded. So and it's very different when you like take a song that's been played, because then the band version sort of forms this skeleton. And you're like, okay, fine, this is how it's worked live. These are the crests and troughs of the whole song. This is the part that's received well by the audience. This song fits well in maybe this part of the set. So, you can kind of test run it when you play it live. And with songs that you produce first, you can be a lot more experimental and open because there is nothing to sort of inform how it should sound. That said, though, like even the songs that we did play live, for example, Live Again being case in point, we had this strong influence from the band version of things, and then we kind of reinterpreted parts of it, and we had to eliminate and unlearn what we knew of the song, and then come back to it. So definitely different, but then when you play with the band, it's difficult to unhear certain things. Like, for example, JJ's maybe choice of groove for Live Again. Had he not played it when we did it live, we may have probably gone with a different kind of groove, but since he played it that way, I really liked that particular groove. It just found its way into the album. So it definitely does influence your choices. You've done it with a band before.
Yeah, and often you'd find that sometimes, artists will make these songs that are kind of impossible to play live, and even though they sound great on the, great on the album, you won't get that when you watch them. So I think it's kind of a tricky situation there, right? Like to make those choices. Yeah. That okay,
that's a big one. Like I have no idea how we're going to play these live. I mean, well, we can play them, but when you actually have something like a string section or a choir. How do you reinterpret that when you perform it live? Like Arnob and I, have a lot of debates and discussions on this very fact. Like, so many artists use tracks, for example.
Yeah, you'd have to use.
And Arnob is anti-tracks.
I mean, everybody uses tracks nowadays, but yeah, Arnob, you want to just chip in and tell us what you feel about it?
I always poo-poo the backing tracks thing unless it's absolutely necessary, and I know that most artists use them. But I am often quite surprised by it. The way I like to think about it philosophically is that the live performance and the recording are two separate things, two separate mediums, sort of like film and theater. And so I always encourage artists, if they can, to reinterpret the crazy parts that they came up with in the studio that you can't really execute live, to reinterpret and reimagine them in the context of the live instruments rather than triggering something. And I always ask people to really question whether, like, why are you triggering something? Like, what's the point? Like, can somebody in your band just play this thing that you just triggered? If they can, then get them to play it. In the extreme circumstances where you have a really essential element that can't be played, then I can understand tracks. I'm not totally against it, but I think most bands that use tracks shouldn't. That's my view. I understand that sometimes for cost reasons and other things, or sometimes
I
for time.
always have a string section there.
Yeah, well, a lot of my favorite bands, like if you listen to their live albums, they make some amazing concessions. Like there's a really amazing Roots album called The Roots Come Alive. It's a live album from the Roots from the early 2000s, before Jimmy Fallon show and all that stuff. And their band setup at that time was just Rhodes, like a keyboard, or just a Fender Rhodes piano, drums, and that's just it. And this is a hip hop group, and they recreate all their beats with just those three instruments. The keyboard isn't even different keyboard sounds; it's just the one electric piano sound, and they just reinterpret all their songs that way. Not a single backing track, no metronome, and they kill it. It's amazing. I'm sorry to break it to everybody. So I encourage people to, instead of relying on backing tracks, to rehearse and use your creativity to make the song come alive. That's the point of a live show. I get, that's it's my
I mean, like there is,
old
like
person
Arnob
view.
said,
38-year-old.
like Arnob said, there's a way to do the songs justice by like changing the arrangement up. But so often, people will come in to a gig almost expecting to hear what they heard on the album. And sometimes they're taken aback by a change in arrangement because a very specific thing that they liked about the song or the album doesn't exist in the live version. And I suppose that's make or break for a lot of people. So it's
I know
mostly
it's
the
make
decision.
break, but it is tricky, right? It's tricky to do that, have the decision. But we're out of time, and I know Tanasha has a bunch of questions, and now so maybe you guys can address them in the comments. But there's one question that she asked, and that's something that I've heard a lot, these days is how do artists go about finding producers? Like, I think one of the things that desperately needed is sort of like a kind of database of producers working in the Indian independent music scene. Do either of you know such a thing, or is anybody working on? Maybe it's something we can put together. But I think a lot of people are looking out to work with different people, and they don't know. And whether it would be great if there could be a database that actually talks about, that has
Yeah.
contacts, emails, maybe genres, maybe costs, if that exists. But yeah, I think that's something to put out there, and like hopefully a resource that's desperately needed in the industry. But thank
I
you
mean,
both
for
so
me, it
much.
was word of mouth. Like I'd
Yeah.
worked on, I worked with Jishnu Short Round, if you've heard his music. Arnob was producing that album just before mine, and I was singing, backup on a lot of the songs. And that was the first time that I'd actually worked with Arnob, and I really liked how articulate and systematic and meticulous he was with the whole process. And I was just like, I think I can work with this person because I lack these things, and he would make up for it.
Not true.
Yeah, being
And
modest
well,
Mally.
I mean, well, in a different way. Like I have these traits maybe in like a different part of the whole production line, but like yeah. So that was how I went about like working with Arnob. Like he worked on Tejas's song before that. Like Tejas and him worked together on River, and that was the first time I heard of him. So most often it goes to like word of mouth. Like you like an artist, you like an album, and then you go and research, you look up the credits, you say, oh, this is a producer whose sound is interesting, then you see what else they've done, and you arrive at that. Sometimes it's like a person who's a fan of your work who approaches you and they're like, hey, I really like this song that I heard you play live. Do you want to do a version of this? You can come to my studio, we can figure it out. So I think it happens in many different ways, but yeah, you're right. Like there should be a database of producers that exist. Because if we're not a part of the scene, we don't know people on a first name
Yeah,
basis.
I mean, if you're brand new and you're just sort of trying to figure stuff out,
Yeah, yeah.
You don't necessarily, and especially now when there are no live gigs happening, and like it's. I mean, I know what they say. It's easier to connect with people online, but I really feel that that face-to-face connection makes so much of a difference. So, it's definitely also harder right now to meet people and get that word of mouth kind of experience. But yeah, we're out of time, and I know we could talk and talk, but thank you so much, both of you, Mali and Arnab, for this extremely insightful talk. And yeah, over to you, Krishna.
Thanks, Amit. Thanks for having us. Thanks for thinking of us first.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
thank you. So
Yeah, I will
for
see you
having
guys
us.
on the best of 2021 lists.
Ali. Hopefully we can live up to it. Hopefully not too many people put out good albums this year.
No, there'll be plenty of other good albums too.
I know. My real hope is that honestly there
A
are.
curse on all of your houses.
You've got Warren, Blackstrat Blues is coming up with an album. They just released an album. There's
Yeah.
there's
The
a whole bunch of
SSPs
stuff
are going to put out
happening.
an album. Yeah, it's going to be good. It's a good year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Cool.
Thank you for that engaging session. Giving us a glimpse of your process and being so generous in sharing. Generous is what popped up for me multiple times during this conversation. To allow us to listen and understand the creative minds and how you as people spend that time finding that synergy and then, producing the brilliant music in Caution to the Wind. So we're thrilled to having launched Collab Conversations with you, Amit, Mali, and Arnob. And we can tell that our audience is joining us online from different parts of the world, would agree with us through all of the comments and interactions that came in through our social media. So,
Thanks to everyone who's listening, and thanks for staying on and being a part of this. Please listen to the album.
Check out my podcast.
I definitely did. Oh, yes. Yeah, we'll link that as well. And thank you for the music. I know I spent all of last evening listening to the entire album. So, yes.
Wow.
So thank you for that. Yes, I really enjoyed it. So, yeah. So the Indian Music Experience Online hopes to see you audiences join us again on Sunday, the 13th of June at 11 a.m. on Zoom for Mind Your Mind Sound Mind Spa. This event explores the power of Tibetan singing bowls meditation with Manjula Singh, and the tickets to the same are on Book My Show. And on Sunday, the 20th of June at 6:30 p.m., we have our World Music Day live event where we bring together a musical interaction between 3 artists, 3 continents, and 3 genres. Apart from our weekly sessions on Zoom as part of the online chain of positivity, which is spiritual music sessions that the IME faculty conducts every Saturday from 4 to 5 p.m. on Zoom. And details of all of these events can be found on our website and social media pages. We thank our panelists, Amit, Arnob, and Mali once again. Thank you so much. And you, the audience, and we hope to see you again soon, very soon at our next event.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care of yourselves.